We have discussed the generative school. Now we will be discussing usage-based school. The usage-based theory of language acquisition was introduced by Tomasello in 2003, which is very recent development. According to this theory, language structure emerges from language use. So it is very different from generative school of thought, which basically emphasizes the structure of the language, the innateness. But as far as this particular theory is concerned, it is the language use which is responsible from the development of language structure. And children build their language relying on their general cognitive skills. So they rely on their general cognitive skills, and it is when those skills are put into use that they come up with the proper structure of the language. The basic idea is that the child learns language from actual usage events. So a child learns a language from using a language, from using it in events or situations or any other activity that they learn language. So that is quite similar to what the constructivism talked about, and yes, the behaviorist approach as well. It's similar, but I won't say altogether the similar approach. That is from particular utterances in particular context and builds up increasingly complex and abstract representation from these. So the complete development, or the complete, in terms of developing language structure, they use particular context, and in that particular context, they increasingly develop the complex system of language. The usage-based approach to linguistic communication may be summarized as: 1. Meaning in use. Second, structure emerges from use. So meaning is use. Structure coming from use. Emphasis is on then the usage. Meaning is use represents an approach to the functional or semantic dimension of linguistic communication. So semantic and function have to do with meaning, that how meaning can be created and how meaning can be understood. So meaning is use is relevant to this particular aspect of linguistic communication, that it is used to convey meaning, and semantics as well as the functional aspect is again referring to the communication which is to convey one's meaningful interaction or expression. Wittgenstein focused on how people use linguistic conventions to achieve social ends. So basically communication in terms of how it fulfills your social function, your social requirements. Structure emerges from use, represent an approach to the structural or grammatical dimension of linguistic communication. So what linguistic or grammatical components can constitute towards creating meaning or meaningful structure of the language. Focus on how meaning-based grammatical construction emerge from individual acts of language use. So meaningful construction emerges from the actual acts that a learner performs, and in terms of when the learner performs that linguistic acts, then you have the language in use. So structural, grammatical structure, or the cognitive structural emerging from the structure of the language in use. The usage-based position is closely allied with that of cognitive linguistics and construction grammar or constructive grammar, where the fundamental linguistic unit is the construction. So basically it's in line with, or it's quite relevant to these two schools of thought, which is cognition as well as the constructivism, where the fundamental linguistic unit based understanding of the fundamental unit of the linguistic is construction. A meaningful symbolic assembly used for the purpose of signally relevant communicative intention. So using a language for a specific communicative purpose. A According to Tomasello, children acquire language equipped with two sets of cognitive skills. One is intention reading and the second is pattern finding. Let's discuss what these two sets of cognitive skills or abilities are. In order to understand the intention reading or pattern finding, let's first of all have these two words in mind, that this theory deals with functional and grammatical. So intention reading is to do with the functional and pattern has to do with the grammatical. Intention reading is what children must do to determine the goal or intentions of mature speakers when they use the linguistic conventions to achieve social ends. So they need to know or determine the goals or intentions when they get in contact with the mature speaker in terms of determining what goals or what social ends needs to be achieved, and thereby learn these conventions from them culturally. In accordance with the functional approach mentioned above, pattern finding is what children must do in order to extract abstract linguist schemas or constructions that has to do with the grammatical part from the individual utterances in accordance with the grammatical approach. So you have seen that Tomasello basically explains two sets of cognitive abilities, which is based on functional, that's intentional, and grammatical aspect, which is pattern finding. YB in 2010 identifies several cognitive processes, and among them are, you have the categorization, which means identifying tokens or lexemes as an instance of a particular type. Chunking, that you have small or have information in chunks in the form of what needs to be practiced or repeated. Then you have rich memory, the storage of detailed information, mapping of an existing cultural pattern into a novel or a new. So mapping of the existing or the existing information or existing information with regard to experience and how that can be used in novel or a new method. And cross-model association, the cognitive capacity to link form and meaning. So your cognitive ability, that how you can have a relevant or the basic information that can convey, or a form, basic form or relevant form that can convey the intended meaning. Now the key features of this particular theory is pre-linguistic communication, utterances and words, schemas and construction, and schematization and analogy. Pre-linguistic communication actually talks about how infant in their early months of age communicate and the way they communicate. For example, almost all infants communicate by pointing before they have acquired or productive language. So they do not use any word or utterances. They point and fulfill their purpose or functional purpose. And also with some kind of iconic or conventional gestures, that gestures they can understood through their interaction with their parents or their family members. Utterances and words, like an act of pointing, then you have these utterances. After pointing, you can have the utterances, which is used to both direct a recipient's attention to something referentially and also to express a communicative motive. Now, schemas and construction is a linguistic construction, which is prototypically a unit of language that comprises multiple linguistic elements and used together to form a relatively coherent communicative function. So now we are talking about a prototypically kind of unit based on the linguistic construction, and they can actually contribute in the communicative function of any individual. Then you have schematization and analogy to see similarities, or one or a child should be able to identify the similarities among different utterances and need skills to schematize or perform schematization. Skills they also use in other domains of cognition. So they should be able to identify the similarities among different utterances and how they can be used in other domains of the cognitive activity. To conclude, the usage-based theory of language acquisition makes the fundamental claim that language structure emerges from language use. This applies at the level of individual words, as their communicative function derives from their use, as well as the level of grammar, as structure emerges from patterns of use of multi-unit utterances.